All right, boys. I wanted to go ahead and finally wrap up the value of others, understanding the economic model of relationships. Um, See the first part of the video if you haven't already, because we went through about half of my highlights, and we're going to go through the other half this time. So maybe a long video. We'll see. Quote, all forms of attraction are functionally indistinguishable. Another way to say the same thing is that it's not possible to know whether you're attracted to the person or to the circumstances surrounding the person. End quote. Another thing that he's kind of saying here, just to help you understand that if it's not quite making sense for you, you can't separate the color of your shirt from the shirt. The shirt is the shirt. That's kind of what he's saying. So I don't really have anything to add to that. I think it's certainly true. You know, the experience is the experience. You cannot separate the experience from it. Quote, this is the origin of fundamental romantic misunderstanding, mistaking attraction to features of the relationship for attraction to the individuals themselves. The two are not the same, but they feel the same. And that equivalence of feeling creates a lot of problems in sexual relationships. End quote. Right, so what he's kind of pointing out here is that I see plenty of women, and I'm sure most men would agree, I've seen plenty of women who I physically find attractive. But they open their mouths and I'm utterly disgusted and I want nothing to do with them. And I still might find them physically attractive, but I wouldn't actually want to engage with them. Right? And so, you know, you might like certain aspects of the relationship that exist, but those aspects of the relationship can exist independently of the person themselves. Something that Psychex says, I don't know if he says it in the books, but I remember one of his videos. He said that you cannot have the relationship you want with the person that you want to have that with. Another way to say that is that you can only have the relationship you want with certain people. You need to find someone that can functionally work within that relationship. That's kind of what he's talking about here. So there you go. Quote, the truth is that there is no happily ever after. When you're out on the open seas, you spend every day staying above water. A ship never gets to not float, end quote. Yeah, I don't think any relationships really end well, and certainly no relationships are smooth sailing. So, yeah, I would certainly agree with this. Quote, the first major crisis of the maintenance phase is what I call the crisis of disillusionment. This crisis generally occurs about 6 months into a burgeoning relationship. I'm probably butchering that word. My bad. End quote. I would generally agree, although I am a little bit different. I get into relationships very differently than most men. Or I even approach dating differently than most men, where I just go right into the deep end of shit, right? I don't play this thing of I don't try to take it seriously or anything like that. I just go straight into the heavy stuff of like, what are you looking for? What do you want? All this kind of shit. Like I get into the nitty gritty of everything and explain what I'm looking for and how it's going to work and all that kind of shit. So I kind of break up this disillusionment pretty early on. I remember in one of his videos, as an aside, again, was that he mentioned you want to draw out this process as much as possible so that way the woman doesn't know you as quickly as possible because the chances of you fitting into her idea of you is pretty much not going to happen. And this is true. I would kind of counter that point and say that her idea of you will never match who you are in the first place. And the only reason she's ever with you is because of that idea of you. And you will constantly be battling her for her to want you to meet that idea of you versus what you really are. That's my experience, personally. So I think there's no winning in that battle, unfortunately. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that in dating men cannot win. In relationships, men cannot win. It makes it very difficult to justify being in a relationship for me. I might make a video on that as a separate topic because I want to stay focused on my notes here because we're kind of branching into several things at this point. But I just wanted to throw that out there. But I might make a video at some point about where I currently sit in my dating life, if you could call it such a thing. It's not like I have a choice in the matter. If a woman shows up, she shows up. But at this point, all right, we're getting into a different video topic. Let's get back to the book. It's not that I don't want to talk about it. It's just I want this to be about the book. So, my bad. Quote, attraction is fuel. You need it to go places. End quote. Yep. I mean, the car ain't going to start if she don't find you hard. Find you hard. God, what am I saying? It ain't going to start unless she finds you hot. That's what it is. Nobody gives a shit about anything else. And ultimately, they don't give a shit about anything else. I would say women especially don't give a shit about anything else besides finding you hot. That's it. Westerner Klein was great about this, where he pointed out that women post on Reddit about how their Chad has shit stains on the couch, and she's okay with it because he's hot. It's like they don't care about hygiene, they don't care about showers, they don't care about any of this, as long as he's hot. It's insane. It's absolutely insane, but such is the way of women. Quote, the decision to like someone almost always precedes the rational basis for that liking. This is why no one can ever explain their attraction. End quote. The decision to like someone almost always precedes the rational basis for that. Yeah, this is true of most anything, honestly. I used to be in a certain line of work. I'm not going to mention what it is, but I used to be in a certain line of work. And the decision that the customer would make, and this kind of is true for any line of work, really, so this applies to anything. That's my point, is that this applies to anything, not just relationships. Every decision you make is an emotionally based decision that you then rationalize later. And I say this as someone who generally would call myself a logical person, but I find this to be true of myself as well. So I'll say it again for the gentleman in the back. Every decision you make is an emotional decision, rationalized later. I don't care how logical you are. I am fairly logical myself. I am fairly not driven by my emotions, or so I think. But I would agree with the notion, though, that ultimately every decision that you do is because of your emotional state, and then you rationalize it later. And I think that extends beyond relationships. I think that is quite literally everything. But I digress. Quote, it's difficult to keep dreaming when you're not awake. End quote. Yeah, he's just talking about the disillusionment thing, where, once you understand women, you can't love them anymore. That's not what he's talking about in this context, for the record. But, this is true of basically anything. Once you understand what the thing is, you don't see it the same way again. Which I'm kind of referencing how he advertises his books there. So, anyway, quote, no one will ever be as good as you want them to be, but with a little luck, they may be good enough for the voyage you have planned, end quote. Very debatable, but, certainly true. No one is ever going to be as good as you want them to be. Although at the point that I'm at, again, I'll probably save this for a different video or multiple videos, we'll see. I hold the opinion that I just don't think women are worth a whole lot. I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze, basically. And I don't know what voyage you would go on with a woman. That's the only thing I would add to this, is I don't know what voyage you would plan that could include a woman, because she's just going to drill holes in your boat, bro. That's just what it is. That's what they do, in my experience and from what I've seen. So, moving on. Quote, in general, whatever someone does to get a relationship is what someone must do to keep a relationship, end quote. Yep. And, therein lies the problem. Because you can't change what women find attractive. And so you can't stop being attractive to women. And that basically requires you to always be putting on a performance, in my experience. I don't think this is something he really addresses in the book per se, but I think relationships are very performative, at least for men. You have to be fitting into a specific mold in order for that to function. Otherwise, it just doesn't. and it gets very tiresome very quickly, in my experience. And from what I've seen of other men, maybe it doesn't get tiresome for them, but it does. It certainly drains them, and not in the good way. Quote, in general, whatever someone does to get a relation... Oh, sorry, my bad. Quote, captains shouldn't go out of their way for passengers. And quote, yeah, don't put much effort into dealing with women, bro. Like, if she... My rule of thumb is, if by the end of the first date she does not want your dick in her mouth, don't bother. Move on. I don't care what the context is. I don't care what the situation is. I don't care what excuses she may have. And I'm not saying that you need to do that. I want to be very clear. If she doesn't want your dick in her mouth by the end of the first date, move on. I'm not saying that she has to do it. I'm not saying that you have to let her do it. I'm just saying, like, I wouldn't recommend doing that, honestly. I personally would never engage in any sexual activity on the first date, although I have done foreplay on the first date, but, you know, that's about it. Nothing that would constitute diseases or anything like that, right? So, just wanted to point that out there. So, yeah. Quote, in general, it's a better idea to be more attractive to a smaller subset of people than to be less attractive to a larger portion of the population. Yeah. End quote. Yeah, I wanted to definitely add on to that, saying that when we talk about looks maxing and all this other shit, all you're really doing is changing the spectrum of women that could possibly find you attractive, no matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you do, you are changing the spectrum of women that find you attractive. So you are closing off certain avenues and opening up other ones. But generally, it is better to niche max, for sure. That's basically what he's saying, and I would agree with that, because you can't be boring wallpaper as a guy. You could be anything but boring wallpaper, and someone somewhere will find you attractive. Hopefully a woman, but... continuing on. Quote, the second crisis of the maintenance phase, the attempted mutiny, end quote. Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, this one doesn't seem to fucking end, in my experience. So, my personal experience, it doesn't seem to fucking end. Women love to ruin shit. They just love to sabotage themselves. They love to sabotage society. They love to sabotage your relationship with them. They love it. They can't get enough of it. Quote, 70-30 split in resource investment between captains and passengers is probably ideal to maintain stability, end quote. That's a horrible split. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with him, because that's about what it felt like when I decided to end my relationship. And from what I know of other men's relationships, they definitely at least put 70% of resource investment in. Now, he says resource investment. I want to clarify, and I'm sure that he would agree with this, although I don't know for sure, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but resource could be anything. It doesn't need to be money. I just want to point that out. Moving on. Quote, most passengers are not shareholders in the venture. They don't own equity in the ship. The benefits they accrue depend on their continued attachment to the vessel, end quote. True, yes. Unfortunately, the legal laws say otherwise in terms of divorce court and family court. But I fully agree with him here. When women are in a relationship with you, they don't contribute to the relationship as much as they... Gosh, what do they do in a relationship? They suck your dick. That's it. It's not really an investment. They are luxury goods aboard the vessel. That's actually pretty much a quote from Sycax himself. So before you shut down my neck about that, that's quite literally what he says in the video. He literally has a video titled "Women Are Luxury Goods." So, just saying. Quote, for your partner to miss you, you first have to leave. After all, there is no need to use intimacy to reconnect with you. If you... I fucked up that highlight. That it just kind of ends there. Okay, so end quote. Yeah, for your partner to miss you, you first have to leave. Yeah, it's true. I think that women fuck this up a lot, where they want to be with you constantly, and that's great. That feels great. But the reality is, you absolutely need to be separate from each other, quite a lot, because I know I will be driven insane if I had to live with a woman. Like, if I had to live with a woman, God, no, I wouldn't want that. Um, and I had a trial run with my previous relationship with that. And while it wasn't as terrible as I thought it might be, it still isn't something that I enjoyed. Um, the reality is, men used to go out on hunts for several days and they wouldn't see their women and then they would come back and then see the woman again, right? I don't think men and women were meant to uh, be together 24/7. I just don't think that's natural. So, moving on. Quote, love has nothing to do with relationships, end quote. It's even in all caps. I don't know if it's in all caps in the book or I just made it all caps. But it is absolutely 100% true. Love has nothing to do with relationships. You can love anyone or anything, and they don't need to interact with you at all. This is what one-itis is. This is what crushes are, so on and so forth, right? Love has nothing to do with relationships. And he's pointed this out several times, and I don't want to put words in his mouth necessarily, so don't think I'm quoting him about any of this. But, marriage for most of human history was political, it was economic, it was nothing to do with love. And we try to make it part of love, and I think that's where a lot of problems come from. Anyway, moving on. Quote, its fundamental premise is that relationships are the medium in which value is transacted. People come together because they want things from others, and they attempt to satisfy these wants by trading unequal things of comparable value. Where this does not occur for whatever reason, no relationship exists. This is true of all consensual relationships of this planet, end quote. True. You may not agree with it, you may not like it, you may think that sounds terrible, but that is the reality. Every single relationship, whether romantic or otherwise, is transactional. I have a great friend who I consider a brother of mine, and we are not actually related. But even me and him agree that, it's a transactional relationship. The reason you might disagree with that, and you might say, well, I have a great relationship with so-and-so, and I don't feel that way. Right, because the transaction is invisible. Sycax says this himself many times in a lot of his videos, I believe. But he has said so himself, is that if you feel that it's not the case in a relationship that you have with someone, it's probably because the transaction is so good and so invisible that you don't really notice it, right? And that's why I have such a good relationship with my brother, is that, who's not really my brother, that we don't need to hash it out. We don't need to hash out the details. The things that we give each other are we just give it. We just hand it out like candy, and it's fine, and it works great. But we still both agree that it is a transactional relationship. I don't think you can ever get away from that. I don't think there is such a thing as a relationship that is not transactional. Quote, if relationships are the medium in which value is transacted and certain goods are invaluable and non-transactable, then it would follow that relationships would not be necessary, end quote. If relationships are the medium and certain goods are invaluable and non-transactable. Okay. I don't think I have anything to add on to that. I think he's being a little... I'm not sure I even quite get it. Let me read it one more time here. I don't know. That kind of sounds like it sounds like something that wouldn't even exist if it was like the other way. Anyway, I'm going to move on. Cool. Moving on. Scrolling. Okay. Quote, correctly understood, non-transactable goods and relationships are independent of each other. However, this doesn't mean they can't co-occur. What it means is that friendship, loyalty, and love are possible without a relationship. In fact, you could argue that this is the truest and surest test of virtues. Cultures all over the world have understandably venerated instances of these goods, outlast their associated relationships, as the highest possible of these virtues. Only a heart of stone would be unmoved by the story of Hachiko, the dog who continued to wait for his master at the train station every day for 9 years following his master's death, or of Samwise Gamgee, who continued to protect Frodo on his quest even after he was unjustly sent away. These characters are indelibly associated with loyalty and friendship, respectively, precisely because the end of their relationships did nothing to affect the expression of their virtue. If you only love until the end of the relationship, did you even love at all? Quote, true. True. I got nothing to add. Beautifully said. Quote, plenty of people are married to people they don't love, and they love people they aren't married to. This may apply to even your own relationship or that of your parents. And if love can exist without a relationship, and a relationship can exist without love, then we have no choice but to conclude that the two don't have anything to do with each other. End quote. Yep. Again, I agree. This is all pretty straightforward at this point. Quote, romance is not about reality. End quote. Ain't that the fucking truth, boys? I don't think I need to say anything like that. That's beautiful. Quote, this means that romantics, consciously or otherwise, will often do all kinds of things to prevent a relationship from succeeding. End quote. True. Romance gets in the way of relationships. If you want a relationship to succeed, you have to follow certain rules. I've said this to many people. I've said this, I don't know if I said this on my YouTube channel before, but yeah. Relationships can only function through a very narrow path. So this very modern notion that you can do anything you want in a relationship, you just have to establish the rules and so on and so forth, I don't think that's true. I think that relationships, especially between men and women specifically, at least, is what I'm speaking on, you have to follow certain rules. I'm not going to break down every single last rule of that, and I don't know if I would be able to on YouTube anyway, realistically speaking. But that would be another video topic, perhaps, if I could finagle that onto YouTube. But I'll probably forget by the time I'm done recording this video anyway. So, moving on. Quote, romantics are ultimately not happy people. End quote. Ain't that the truth? And women will say they're romantic. They're not. Any woman who says she's romantic is bullshitting you. That's just not true. Women are not the romantic gender. Quote, the people with whom you enter into relationships should improve the quality of your life. If they don't, you can love them from a distance if you so desire. However, if you were to stop loving them as a consequence of their behavior, then you were probably never in love with them to begin with. Any positive emotion you experienced was likely not love but satisfaction, the satisfaction of getting what you wanted. This is why when you stopped getting what you wanted, the feeling disappeared, end quote. Yeah, I can agree. At the end of my last relationship, I can still say, even to this day, that I do love her from a distance. Now, I wouldn't go out of my way to like help her in life or anything like that. And I haven't contacted her since I ended the relationship. But you know, I agree. You can love people from a distance, and if you only love them because you got something out of them, then that's probably not love. As he said, that's probably satisfaction. I agree with him. Love is something you give to someone. And they didn't have to ask for it, and they didn't necessarily want it, and they don't even need to know about it. So, there you go. Moving on. Quote, non-transactable goods are the heads of dead cats. Both are essentially valueless. However, we need to appreciate that the word valueless has a double meaning. It can mean both without value and beyond price. The goods that no one would ever think to buy are just as absent from the marketplace as the goods that cannot be purchased with all the money in the world. Or, to put it another way, the goods that can't be bought are functionally indistinguishable from the goods that can't be sold, at least from the perspective of the marketplace. True, I agree. I agree 100%. Don't really have anything to add about that. I don't want to ramble for nothing, so. Moving on. Quote, in my opinion, 90% of a successful relationship comes down to selection, end quote. I 100% agree with this. Again, I agree with his assertion that you cannot have a relationship you want with anyone. You can only have the relationship you want with certain women. And even then, honestly, I don't know how true that is. And I say that because the relationship that I want at this point is so very specific and very narrow, and also probably doesn't have much in the way of goods that women want besides dick. And you may think, what, you want a casual relationship? No, I don't want a casual relationship. I want basically a different video. Different video. Let's move on. I don't want to waste time with that. Quote, it's essential to understand that you can't have any relationship with anyone. You can only have certain relationships with certain people, end quote. Yep, as I said, he does say that in this book, and he's also said as much in his videos. Quote, not everyone is capable of a peaceful, loving, committed relationship. End quote. True. Very true. I don't think women are capable of it at all, but I digress. uh, Even if that relationship could even exist, but I don't think women are capable of it. I will say, like in the context of the relationship that I have with my great brotherly friend, we have only had one instance where we had like drama in our entire lives. And to be fair, that had nothing to do with me. He even said as much. It had nothing to do with me. It was due to outside stress that he had. So, taking that into account, I guess we could still argue that our relationship it was still peaceful, loving, and committed, and so on and so forth. It's not gay if the balls don't touch. Anyway, quote, keep in mind that if you need to qualify any of these attributes, example given, I'm peaceful, but not if, or I would only love someone if, then you don't yet possess them. This doesn't necessarily make you a bad person, but it might mean that you need to adjust your expectations for the time being. After all, if you want a high-paying job, you need to be able to offer a high-value skill. The same is comparably true for relationships. Yeah, I would agree. I gave my ex love, and I didn't ask for anything in return. I didn't make it conditional whatsoever. She made certain things conditional, among other issues that I had with the relationship that led me to leaving it. So there's that. And this one, oh boys, if nothing else from this video, number one, I want you to take away that love has nothing to do with relationships, and this is the next best quote I think in the entire book. Quote, the cost of winning is overpaying, end quote. I'll say it again. Quote, the cost of winning is overpaying, end quote. I have nothing to add on to this. This is 100% true in my experience. I think if you look at any guy in a relationship, this is so true. And again, I want to specify, we are only talking about heterosexual relationships and nothing else. So I don't claim to be an expert, and neither does Psychax or Ryan Taraban does. I believe he doesn't claim to be an expert on anything but the relationship dynamics between men and women, specifically. Moving on. Quote, insisting on unnecessary criteria is the most common way people price themselves out of the marketplace, end quote. Yeah, although he says people, I would mostly argue women, but otherwise, yeah, I agree. Quote, dating is a hiring process, end quote. True, I got nothing to add. Quote, the more long-term the desired relationship, the longer the hiring process should be, end quote. Yeah, I would agree. I was in a position where there was a big life change upcoming for me by the next year, and I would have had to continue the relationship with this woman for another year before making that big decision. And Ryan Taraban, otherwise known as Psychex, he says you should have a relationship at least a year before making any life-changing decisions with them. And I would generally agree with that. Because by then you should have a good idea of what you're getting into and what problems you're going to continue to have in a relationship. I don't think he says it in this book, but as an aside, every relationship has problems, and the only question you need to ask yourself is, do I want to continue experiencing this problem? Because the reality is, there are some problems in your relationship that are never going to go away. And either you live with them or you move on. Those are your two options. That's it. You can't solve the problem. I promise you. You cannot solve the problems. Anyway, moving on. Quote, when vetting for a long-term relationship, it's generally a good idea to take a page from human resources. Hire slow and fire fast, end quote. He has a video on this. But otherwise, I agree with this. Currently, my good friend, my brother, he recently got back into dating, and I'm kind of bringing him back into it as support, of course. But basically, I tell him exactly that, she disqualified herself, and he's unfortunately, these like goth emo chicks, like that's his type. But thankfully, he's not limiting himself just to that, because I told him, like, you can't be dating those women because they're fucking awful. I mean, all women are awful, but I gave him like a list of shit that was like, if a woman has this or shows this behavior, move on. Don't bother. Just because they're already disqualifiers. Period. There's not a discussion there. It just is what it is. Anyway, moving on. Quote, breaking up with someone in whom you've invested a good deal of time and energy is not easy to do. People's hearts are not made of Teflon. End quote. Yeah, it wasn't an easy decision that I made when I left the relationship, and I knew that if I was going to make this decision, that it was the decision, like, that's it. Like, I'm not going to come back. And even if she wanted to come back and she messaged me first or something like that, I would still say no. I would still say no, 100%. Quote, rejecting others is not something that most people do well. Some people reject far too quickly, and others don't reject quickly enough. All other things being equal, the speed at which people tend to reject others is directly related to their perceived optionality. End quote. Yeah, I would agree with this. I'm a little different because my previous relationship was over, at this point, it was back in October of 2024 that I ended it. And I have been on, I think, 0 dates since then. I think so. I got stood up twice. That's probably another video right there. Because I never explained that story. Not that it's a very long story. But, yeah, I don't have any optionality. So, again, don't follow me, though. I will readily admit to many things. I'm very much similar to many men, but in other ways, I am not. And that is one of those ways where I'm not similar to other men, in that I may have 0 optionality, but I will still leave, even though I have nothing to go to. So, anyway, quote, one of the most useful concepts in deciding whether to reject a dating prospect is the deal breaker. People are entitled to their deal breakers. They can have as few or as many as they would like. That said, the more deal breakers that you have, the harder it is for them to find a qualified partner. Basically, a deal breaker is a trait of behavior in a potential partner that, if it never changed or stopped, would undermine your willingness to enthusiastically remain in the relationship, even if everything else were ideal. For instance, one of the most commonly accepted deal breakers... it's a broken highlight. I don't think I... Okay, that's just the end of that. It's a broken highlight from Kindle. It happens. When you highlight things multiple times on Kindle, it'll keep each and every single highlight, and that sometimes fucks up, where it gets really messy in this notepad file. Anyway, moving on. Quote, opposites might attract, but they generally don't stay together. If neither person ever changed with respect to this mismatch, then the incompatibility would likely undermine the aggrieved party's willingness to enthusiastically remain in the relationship. In most cases, these kinds of trait differences are deal breakers and would be justified grounds for rejection, end quote. Yeah, I agree with this. Opposites might attract, but they generally don't stay together. For example, early on in the relationship that I had asked her how often she wanted to keep in touch, like while we were in the relationship. And she said she wouldn't want to go a day without talking to me. And I responded and told her I could go a week. And that, that I didn't consider that to be much of a problem early on, but by like the 3-month mark, I realized that was probably a bigger issue than I initially thought. For the record, the relationship lasted about 7.5 months. But that was definitely one of the big problems that we had, is that she wanted more attention and I was satisfied with much less. Because I could be in a relationship with a woman and very easily, interact with her once a week and be fine. If anything, it'd be like, thank God I don't have to talk to her for another 7 days. Shit's brutal. Quote, in long-term relationships, it's important to pick the person whose faults you can live with. Demanding that he or she change them after the fact is the relationship equivalent of buyer's remorse, end quote. Yep. That's pretty much my previous relationship. Yep. And now, granted, there's a timeline for this, and I would say 7.5 months is more than enough time to give it a fair shot to see if the problems could be solved. And so I've now recognized this is just a problem or series of problems that are just always going to stick around. So, again, I would agree 90% of a relationship success is selection. It does take time, unfortunately, to figure that out, though. And not in terms of, what is the selection on offer? You know what I mean? Moving on. Quote, keep in mind that the more you need, the more you must be willing to suffer, must be willing to offer in return. You still suffer anyway. I need a drink of water. Cool. And no, I'm not going to edit that out. Okay. The more that you need, the more you must be willing to offer. Yeah, sure. Sure. I agree. Although I would add to that and say that, honestly speaking, my dudes, you should have to put no effort into a relationship at all. And the reason I say that is because if she finds you attractive, you won't have to. I think that's the reality. Now, granted, she has to find you like really attractive for that. But if you find yourself, if like he said 70 to 30, I think that if you're putting in 70% of the effort and she's putting in 30%, which is generous for the woman to do 30%, you're probably going to get burnt out. That was my experience. Although I would say I was doing like 80 by the time the relationship was over. It wasn't always 80, but I digress. Moving on. Quote, women sometimes rankle at this comparison. However, this aligns with the intentions of most women in the sexual marketplace. Remember, women mate and date for gain, because they can. As a result, resources generally flow from the man to the woman in heterosexual relationships. And in every culture that has ever existed on this planet, it is the servant, i.e. the employee, who takes the money. Women's role as employees in the sexual marketplace is not the vestige of oppressive patriarchal social structures. It is a necessary consequence of their hypergamous tendencies. Women can be the employers, or they can get a paycheck, but they can't have it both ways, though women most certainly try. And any man who abdicates the privileges of the employer role, but not the responsibilities, is complicit in his own exploitation. End quote. I agree. The question then you have to ask is it worth it? And by God, that is not an easy question to answer. But most men will tell you it's not worth it. And I would generally agree. I would agree. It's hard to fight biology, though. Quote, remember, if you don't have a plan, it means that you're part of someone else's, and the more thought men put into appropriate selection, the easier the entire dating process becomes for everybody. End quote. Yep. Again, choose women who choose you. Choose women who find you attractive. If she doesn't find you attractive, move the fuck on. Don't bother. Don't convince her. Don't talk to her. Don't negotiate. Just move the fuck on. Oh, you don't want to suck my pee-pee? Okay, bye-bye. Like, that's it. That's all it should be. That should be dating in a nutshell, my dudes. That should be it. You got dudes out here worrying about first messages and text game and all this other shit. It's like, nah, bro. If you message her, are you going to suck my pee-pee? And she says, yes, daddy, then you're good. If she doesn't say yes, daddy, if she says anything else, if she puts a roadblock up between her mouth and your dick, move the fuck on. That's honestly been my experience. That's, as limited as it was, for the record. Most women didn't do that for me. Right? And I'm not saying do this on the first date, but I'm just saying, like, if they don't want that, then don't bother. That's been my experience. Don't bother. There's never been a woman who didn't want that, and I ended up getting something out of her. Like, no. That's never happened, and it never will happen. It's not a matter of anything that you do or don't do. It's literally just numbers at that point. Quote, people can't get everything they want, so if you're having trouble finding someone who satisfies your criteria, then it's a broken highlight, unfortunately, but I think you get the point. And I would agree, although he says people again, and I really think he should be saying women. Again, he's not technically wrong, but this is like saying, 90% of people who can't get everything they want are women. You know what like, let's be real here. All right, what do men want? A hole to put their dick in, okay? At least one. And that's really it. That's what men want. That's it. That's all men want. They're very easy to please. Women can never be pleased. So, Quote, the more you integrate your life with someone, the more difficult it becomes to extricate yourself, both emotionally and logistically, from the relationship, which defeats the whole purpose of a diligence period. The conveniences of such an arrangement are typically not offset by the liabilities. So if you're not yet ready, then don't sign the lease or the marriage license. Either continue to date or go your separate ways. Yep, precisely. You have a diligence period. Figure it out. See what's up. Don't trust what women say. Trust what they do. And in my case, I chose to go separate ways. Not that I would ever get married, but that was never in the cards. But I digress. Quote, physical attraction is not superficial. End quote. I would agree. It is not superficial. It is just what it is. You don't really get to decide it. So he's not talking about it being superficial as in something that you can look at. That's not the definition of superficial anyway. Physical attraction goes down to your very genetics yourself of what you find attractive. It's not a choice. So that's kind of what he's getting at. Quote, the first question is, do I like this person? No, not not love. In my experience, liking someone is more associated with relationship success than loving someone. End quote. I would agree with this. It's like a video game. I recently played the demo for Pragmata, and it's got that hacking shit. And at first I'm like, okay, I like that it's different, but I'm not sure I like the different thing. Meaning, I said this to my friend. I said, I think Pragmata is going to overstay its welcome with the hacking shit, because that's going to be the entire fucking game, and I just can't see that hacking shit being fun for even 5 hours. I can't see that being fun for 5 hours. So, anyway, moving on. Quote, this is kind of a half-broken thing, so bear with me. Quote, it is our responsibility to temper our ideals with reality, at least if we want to make the best use of the opportunities we've been given. End quote. Yeah, I agree. Nothing to say. Quote, the key to relationships is having high hopes and low expectations. End quote. I guess I would agree with that. It's brutal, but yeah, I guess I would agree with that. Yeah. I don't think I have too much of an issue with that. Quote, to clarify his feelings for any particular woman, a man can find it helpful to consider whether he would actually want to spend time with her if sex were off the table. And since this is difficult to approach in the hypothetical, most men... it breaks there. My bad. End quote. But I think you get the point. And honestly, man, I think he's kind of being a little facetious here. Because in my opinion, if I can't possibly fuck a woman, like if it's not remotely a possibility, then I'm not fucking interested in interacting with her. And I think that's true of like 99% of men. So, I get what he's saying, but I think that his hypothetical is so nonsensical, because I don't think any man would reasonably want to spend time with a woman that he could not fuck. There's a difference between not fucking and possibility of fucking, right? So, moving on. There's a few broken things here. Quote, the second question is, do I like myself when I'm with this person? This might be the most important criterion for a successful relationship, end quote. Yeah, and I would add on to this and just say that, again, I think being in a relationship as a man is a performance. Not just in the bedroom. It is a performance in general. You have to fill the role that she has for you, and I mean that in terms of like an actor's role. And if you're not going to do that, she's going to be unhappy, and you're not going to have fun with her, and you might be unhappy if you realize that you have to play an actor's role, and that's kind of difficult. But I think that's the truth. I don't think you cannot be yourself in a relationship. You have to act. You have to perform. I think that's just the truth of things. Quote, one of the primary ways we learn about ourselves is through the process of relating to others, end quote. Yep, I agree. Quote, for better or worse, you only accompany someone else, but you cannot avoid the experience of yourself, end quote. Yep, I agree. Quote, ultimately, you'll want to keep someone around for the long term who facilitates a positive experience of yourself, end quote. I agree. I don't think that's necessarily possible with a woman, but I agree with the sentiment. Quote, in any game, a player's best possible chance of winning lies in consistently making good moves without blundering. Of these two components of success, it is far more important to learn how to avoid blundering than it is to learn how to make better moves. This is due to the asymmetry between creation and destruction. A structure that took 100 years to build can be leveled in a few seconds of controlled demolition, end quote. Yeah, I would agree, and that's why I said earlier that you can only have a successful relationship through a very narrow path. So if you think you can make the rules, you cannot. There are certain rules you have to follow. There is certain things you can do, but most things you have to do a certain way if you want a relationship to be successful, in my experience and in my opinion. But I think that is objectively true. Quote, all other things being equal, it is in most women's best interest to push for victory as hard and as fast as possible, as this strategy allows them to exploit their initial advantages in the marketplace. Conversely, it is in most men's best interest to avoid defeat for as long as possible, as this strategy affords them time to muster an equivalent or superior force. So he's being a little allegorical here, so I'll try to not put words in his mouth, but at the same time try to explain this just in case it's not quite clicking for you. Basically what he's saying is when women have the best assets, quote unquote, I'm not quoting him, but I hope you get what I mean. She should be finding a man as quickly and as push as much as possible. Give him what he wants, basically. And on the other side, he's saying most men should avoid defeat. And what he is meaning by that, he's kind of presupposing that you're already in a dating situation. Because if you're not in a dating situation, then you've already technically been defeated as a man. Right? You're an excess male, you're an unwanted man. So he's kind of assuming that you're already a wanted man in the first place. But then again, pretty much none of this matters to a man who is not in that category of already being selected for. So just throwing that out there. Although I would argue that I don't think men can be defeated so much as just not be attractive enough to avoid defeat. Hopefully that made sense, because I don't really want to harp on that, because I'm tired. But I'm trying to wrap this up without making a third part. That's what I'm trying to do, in case you haven't noticed. Quote, femininity, one of the few goods that men cannot secure more cheaply and easily from other men. Arguable. Not that I'm suggesting it. I'm just saying, it's been said many times on the internet that men are better at being women than women. Just throwing that out there, Doc. Just saying. Continuing, quote, which makes it a trait that men highly value in women in the sexual marketplace, has increasingly been considered a shameful relic of a benighted past. End quote. I agree with the sentiment, although, again, I would argue that from what I've seen, I would say men are way better at being feminine than women are. And I think that women being feminine is actually their own act that they have to put on in a relationship, in my experience, unfortunately. This world sucks. Quote, women who emphatically insist that they do not care what men want are likely to be as successful in the sexual marketplace as job applicants who profess to be indifferent to what employers are looking for in the commercial marketplace. End quote. I agree, although the definition of success for women in the dating marketplace is basically how much Chad dick they can get. So, a woman will more likely use the term dating for what was a one-night stand than a situationship. So, moving on. Quote, insisting that commitment precedes sex is no longer a viable strategy for most women. In today's sexual marketplace, this would be tantamount to trying to sell a car without wheels, end quote. I agree. And the way that I operate, I tell women this, I am not your boyfriend until I have put my penis in you. In some way, shape, or form. We have to have sex. I don't really care what form it takes place in, but we have to have sex in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, boyfriend does not exist. You don't get boyfriend privileges. You don't get the label, so on and so forth. But I always consummate the relationship with the first act of sex. That's always what I establish with women and agree to. Quote, with this in mind, we can see that women's best strategy in today's sexual marketplace is to offer sex prior to commitment, especially if they are no longer virgins, not because it will facilitate commitment, but because it will prevent ineligibility, quote, end quote. I agree. If I can't put my dick in you, I don't want to talk to you. That's it. That should be so much would be fixed in society overnight if men just held to that standard of, if I can't put my dick in you, I'm not going to talk to you. Period. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to give you attention. I'm not going to talk to you. But alas, most men are not me. But that's probably a good thing. Outside of the relationship dilemma, that's probably a good thing. Quote, men will go to incredible lengths to secure and retain women who offer sexual experiences they cannot find elsewhere, even against their better judgment, and they are often more loyal and dedicated to women who provide such opportunities since it's hard to go back to skim once you've had a taste of cream. End quote. Yeah, I would agree with this, unless you're me. But again, in one of the few aspects that I am different from most men, this is one of them, where I will not go to incredible lengths to secure and retain a woman. I think quite the opposite, but I won't get into that. Moving on. Quote, the male ego is highly susceptible to flattery. A woman can make a man believe that he is the best she's ever had as a smart woman, end quote. True, but unfortunately for men like me who are very wise to all this, a woman who says that kind of shit, I just can't believe them. My ex told me many, many times that I was the best man ever, and she meant that in all ways, not just sexually, and that I was perfect, and so on and so forth. And I could never believe a woman that says that shit. It's not her specifically. I just couldn't believe any woman that says that shit because I don't think it's true. I don't think it's true, and I don't think they believe that either. I think it's just an act. It's a performance. My opinion. And my experience, I think. But who knows? I'm not in a woman's head, and Lord knows I don't want to be. Quote, though largely unacknowledged by society, it is actually extremely difficult to be a young man. End quote. True. Nothing to add. Quote, a man who has nothing other people want is invisible to others. He is useless and blamed for his own uselessness. End quote. True. Nothing to add. Quote, when it comes to sexual relationships, a man must pay, but the more the woman likes him, the greater the discount. End quote. True. I agree. I would argue that a relationship, though, is really only worth it to a man if he doesn't have to pay at all. But that's just that's unattainable for most men. I'm sure me and Dr. Orion Taraban would agree on that. Quote, most men never experience abundant optionality in the sexual marketplace because they commit too soon, and this commitment is costly time, energy, and money that could be invested into increasing their wealth and status and influence, all of which significantly improve man's positioning in the sexual marketplace, are instead diverted into a relationship. For a man, arriving at the point at which he might finally reap the benefits. End quote. I would only disagree with this in that the reason most men don't have optionality is because they're not attractive enough to have the optionality. That's it. Now, time, energy, and money can make you more attractive as a man, but I think it has been shown time and time again that the most important thing to women is the looks. So none of that is mentioned in this quote. That's the only thing I would throw in there. Looks trumps everything. 100% of the time. All the time. Every time. Quote, most men eventually face the bitter truth that being good does not secure them relationships or sexual opportunities they desire. This is because women do not go around rewarding goodness with relationships or sexual opportunities. For better or worse, both are awarded to men who can get them, independent of what virtues they may or may not possess. End quote. And that is why we should repeal the quote, to stabilize a relationship, men must make an effort to actively cultivate optionality for themselves that is comparable to the passive optionality enjoyed by the women with whom they transact. Failure to do this means women retain their power advantage through the course of the relationship. This does not bode well for the long-term success of any given relationship. Such an arrangement runs counter to women's hypergamous tendencies. End quote. Yep. I would agree with this. Basically what he's saying is men need to continue to have other options that the woman knows about in order to keep her in check. That is what he is saying. And that is unfortunately true. Not that you have to engage with those options, but she needs to know that she could kick rocks if you told her to. That's what she needs to know. Although I don't think you actually need options for that. Just throwing that out there. So I don't think you need the options, realistically. She doesn't need to necessarily know. She just needs to know that you will fucking leave. That's all she really needs to know. Quote, a man must make an effort to remain sufficiently attractive to enough women for him to be able to effortlessly exercise that optionality if and when he sees fit. even or especially if he's in a committed relationship, end quote. All right, I think I get what he's pointing out here is that optionality is more for the man than it is for the woman to keep her around and so on and so forth, because it's very difficult for a man to give up a woman that he has for a woman that he doesn't have access to, right? So I think that's what he's really getting at. I don't think he quite says that in the book, but I'm pretty sure that's what he's getting at. So it's more important for the man, actually, than it is for the woman, necessarily. Because it would be easier for the man to say no if he already has something else to go to. Quote, all other things being equal, men achieve more success in the sexual marketplace by fishing, and women achieve more success by hunting, end quote. True. I can't tell you how much fucking stupidity not that I go to Reddit, but I've seen so many like screenshots of Reddit, and every time it's like, I as a woman asked out a man and he said yes! Like it's a fucking like miracle that a man said yes to her, and it's like, sweetie, like you could have done that 500 years ago. And he still would have said yes. You didn't have to do anything. You literally just go, any woman can walk up to just about any fucking guy and say, I like you. Can we be together forever? And that man would say yes. Doesn't even have to fuck you. That's how damn bad men are right now. Quote, where there is no transacted value or relationship neither exists nor can it exist. End quote. Sure, he's kind of already said that before, but all right. Quote, all this has a clear analog to the sexual marketplace. As difficult as it may be to believe, people have entered into relationships for largely the same reasons they have historically undergone hard physical labor. Both have represented the best available solution to certain critical problems of living for the majority of people, end quote. I agree, and that is why we have a problem, because women can get money from outside of men, or another way to put it is women can get food and survive outside of directly interacting with the man who is providing those things. So let me just make that clear. The problem is women can go to the grocery store and buy meat, where it used to be that the man would go hunt the meat and the woman would have to suck the man's dick to get the meat from the man. The kind of meat that she can actually eat, not the meat that he puts in her. But nowadays, that doesn't have to happen. Nowadays, she goes to the grocery store and she doesn't need to know the man who put the food in the grocery store for her to eat. She could just buy it with the money that she most likely got from her employer, who is most likely a man. But obviously, having a husband that loves her is far inferior to Mr. Shlomo, that is her boss. Anyway, moving on. Quote, the uncomfortable reality is that certain ideologies are only feasible within sufficiently advanced technologies, end quote. And I would add, with certain homogeneity in the society itself. And certain ideologies just shouldn't be around anyway, because they're just wrong and stupid. Quote, women's collective success has made mating and dating more difficult and expensive for both men and women, end quote. Wow, it's almost like the world will be a better place when women don't, quote unquote, succeed. I would very much argue what he says here is quote unquote collective success. I would love to hear a definition of what he means there, because I would argue that whatever fucking definition he comes up with, I would not agree that that is successful. As far as I'm concerned, success for women is finding a guy who will take care of you until the day you die. Outside of that, I don't think there's anything such as success for a woman, period. I don't care what she did or does, and not that she does anything anyway, but anyway, moving on. Quote, women's social success has significantly reduced the pool of men that women would even consider as candidates for mating. Despite their social advantages, women have not surrendered their hypergamous instincts. They still desire men who can elevate their lifestyles, end quote. And that's why they shouldn't get to do it. They shouldn't get to do it. No, they shouldn't at all. Quote, contrary to popular belief, men are not intimidated by successful women. This is a rationalization employed by such women to emotionally cope with their encountered difficulties in the sexual marketplace. On the other hand, it might be true that men are not attracted to successful women, end quote. Ain't that the fucking truth, Doc? Quote, men exchange resources for sexual opportunity, and women exchange sexual opportunity for resources. Moral outrage or exhortations to the contrary will do nothing to change this, end quote. Thank you. He said what I said. He said it. He said it. He has a degree. I don't have a degree, but we both said it. That's how it worked for all of human history. I went and got the meat. Women wanted my meat, and I said, sweetie, I have to put my meat in you if you want it. And she said, yes, daddy. And that's it. That's the history of humanity. And if you don't like it, I don't know what to tell you. Quote, every man must now compete with every other man on the planet for the girl next door. Every woman must now compete with every other woman in the world for their community's most eligible bachelor. Optionality that previously was only available to emperors or movie starlets as recently as 10 years ago is now taken for granted by ordinary men and women, end quote. I want to emphasize that it's really just ordinary women and even sub-ordinary women that are having this optionality. 90% of men, at least, are not having this optionality, so it's a little disingenuous there, but I'm sure he knows that for the record. Quote, these technologies ensnare people with the illusion of infinite optionality, end quote. Again, he's using the word people, and I know why he's using the word people, but it's not people, it's women. Quote, like it or not, forming a relationship with a real human being requires some degree of settling, end quote. Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say it. I've gotten in trouble on YouTube for presuming such things, but let's just say that I would love to hear the definition of real human being, and I'll leave it at that. Quote, no one can get everything he or she wants from a given relationship, but where to draw the line is always an individual choice, end quote. Well, yeah, but free will doesn't exist, so, I'm not gonna, it's splitting hairs. Anyway, moving on. Quote, people achieve an enormous gain by giving up the infinite potential for a given actual by giving up nothing for something, end quote. Yep, I agree. I think people underestimate how important it is to have someone in your corner. That is something very lost to most people, and I don't think they value that enough. Quote, it should be abundantly clear that marriage, as conveniently understood, does no work for a sizable portion of the population. More than half of marriages end in divorce. 17.5% of those that remain aren't particularly happy. I don't know where the number 17 is. I don't know why that's in there. Okay. Whatever. And have those that remain. Yeah, I would agree. I would say most relationships are not happy in the first place. For a number of reasons, and I would say that mostly has to do with the inability for the man to actually leverage any power over the woman, but I digress. Quote, marriages fail because people want it to be too many things. The modern conceptualization of marriage is a hyper-conflation of many. I agree. Marriage was mostly an economic thing or a political thing, and that was about it. It was not meant to be anything more. People want... Even my friend, who I consider a brother, he's not even sure what he wants from women at this point. And, he would mention things like, oh, I was talking to this girl and she's boring. And I was like, what do you want? Like, do you want a woman who's entertaining? Because I told him, if you want a woman who's interesting, you're gay. You're just gay. Like, go fuck a man. Fuck me. I'm pretty interesting, but because that's the reality. Like, women are not interesting. Okay? Like, if you want a woman who's interesting, you're gay. Like, you're not going to find that. Like, the question you have to ask yourself as a man is, what do you want from a woman? And can women actually offer you that? And if the answer is no, that a woman can't offer you the thing you're looking for, then stop asking for it. Women aren't going to be interesting. They're not going to talk about interesting things. That's fine. That's not their job. Their job is to suck pee-pee. That's it. That's really it. That's really about it. Like, if you're asking for anything more from a woman than that, you're going to be disappointed in some way, shape, or form. And what I mean is that, yeah, if you want a woman who's nice to you, yeah, a woman can be nice to you. She can also be very mean to you. She can also withdraw that intimacy from you for arbitrary reasons. That's what I had in my last relationship. So, just throwing that out there. Just throwing that out there. Anyway. Last one, boys and girls. Quote, given human nature and individual limitations, it has never been, nor it will ever be possible to get everything you want from a single person. End quote. Ain't that the truth? And that's true of even the man who I would consider my brother, right? I can't get everything I want from him. Like that, he doesn't have a pussy, unfortunately. We both wish we had pussies. Anyway. Jesus. As I destroy my desk and my knee. Alright, boys. I wanted to get this done. I didn't want to do a part 3, so hopefully you enjoyed a fucking hour of this. Absolute lovely commentary from yours truly. And I love you all, boys. Yeah, that's all I got. Take care.